I was watching a television programme the other day about the tides around the British coastline. The beach scenes and shots of sea and waves were interspersed with chats with those living and working there. As the presenter was talking to a fisherman on his boat out in the bay, the man said that phrase that everyone is familiar with: "Time and tide wait for no man." Instantly my mind turned, of course, to shorthand, and I think the same would occur to anyone with a different interest or hobby that needs instant action or reaction. In my case, the speakers who would never wait were my shorthand teachers, as they always went faster than was comfortable, so that we did not get lax or lazy. With some skill in hand, these difficulties were not so apparent at work, unless someone was reading from their scribbled notes, which was not often. Like the sea, there is no holding back the torrent of words, and you have to either be prepared or get out if you don't want to drown. This reminded me of a holiday we had in Cornwall many years ago. We took a day trip to Newquay, which has several beaches separated by small cliff promontories. When the tide is out, it is one long strip of sand, and we wandered round the little headland to the next beach. When we saw that the tide was coming in a little way off, we turned back to retrace our steps, not wanting to take the longer and less interesting route of continuing up the second beach and making our way back along the cliff-top road. It was only a few yards to get round that corner, and although we started off walking on damp sand, within a minute we were splashing through the incoming ripples. Behind those tiny advancing wavelets was a huge expanse of grey sea that had no intention of letting us keep our sandals dry. The view in front of us, of yellow sand, deck chairs and distant shops and car park, was much more attractive than the view behind us of rows of waves of ever-increasing height as one looked farther out. I did not enjoy having crossed the line from being by the sea to being in it, an ever-moving boundary, one that has to be predicted and avoided. Later on in the seaside television programme, they were looking at an old mechanical tide prediction machine that could be fed information and produce tide tables for any place in the world. The presenter talked to a lady who had worked there for many years before it was discontinued in the 1960s. He commented on the neatness of the index cards that contained the data. She said that neat handwriting was essential, as accuracy was paramount, and that mistakes were not tolerated. This last phrase fairly jumped out at me as one of my shorthand tenets, learned at college, although with much less serious consequences than issuing an inaccurate tide table. The necessity for accuracy was not an added extra because the lady and her colleagues were especially keen at their jobs, but an indispensable and immovable part of their work, never to be disregarded or neglected. I am sure that if they had the slightest doubt about anything, it would be checked and verified until it was perfect. In shorthand, this attitude is the only one that will bring constant improvement, as well as the approval by an employer of your error-free work. Wrong outlines have to be tolerated for the sake of getting something down, and it is easier to allow them during note-taking if you know you will be sorting them out later, so that they do not trip you up again. On another seaside holiday on the south coast of Britain, we visited Berg Island near Plymouth, which can be reached on dry sand at low tide. When the tide was in, a sea tractor conveyed visitors across to the island. We walked back in good time, but stood a while looking at the waters, creeping very slowly round both sides of the island, waiting for the moment when they would meet. With holiday makers and eager children watching intently, the two leading edges approached each other and were a minute away from meeting. At that moment, two children decided to intervene and rushed in, and with their hands started quickly scraping two small channels between them. The waters were desperate to join up, and knew exactly what to do, rushing along the shallow groove, and meeting with a bit more force and splash than they would otherwise have done. I am sure they spent that night making plans to come back the next day and repeat the performance, probably with a few more minutes in hand in order to dig a bigger trench. I took a photo and called it "Helping the Tide Come In." The sea had not been stopped, but it had been controlled in a small way. The vast ocean altered in its course, using nothing but hands.